what are we going to do with Devonta Smith this week? That's the biggest question. He has, I think, one of the widest range of outcomes among wide receiver threes. Like, going through our projections, we have Elijah Moore and Devonta Smith back to back in projections. However, I feel way more comfortable about Moore getting me locked in 10 to 12 points than Devonta Smith this week. He's healthy. The hamstring injury is in the past. He's missed 2 weeks. He was back to full practice. He should be full go. I expect him to get a full complement of snaps. Usually when the Eagles get a guy back to full practice, he's actually full go. The problem is the volume here is horrendous. Like we were talking about earlier, Eagles are huge favorites. The Eagles are the most run-heavy team in the league, negative 10% pass rate under expectations since their bye. Jalen Hurts is averaging just 22 pass attempts per game over his last 8 starts. Dallas Goedert will miss here, but to me, Devonta Smith has a floor of 4 points and a ceiling of 20. He's a really, really tricky call this week. I think if, let's say you're 8-5 and you're favored, and you're trying to decide between Devonta Smith and another receiver, I would maybe take a slightly higher floor play. And if you're a dog, chase some ceiling with Devonta Smith because the Panthers secondary is so bad. He might just need 3 or 4 targets to, get 65 yards and a touchdown in this game.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Yo, what is going on? Welcome into week 14. Mini fantasy football playoffs have started this week. Maybe you have your league playoffs starting next week, but regardless, we got to get some wins this week. Huge amounts of money, jelly beans, whatever you want to call it, up for grabs this week. Excited to talk starts and sits with you beautiful people here heading into this week 14. We got 6 teams out on a bye. Bit of a tricky week for sure. Really good fantasy teams we've been relying upon, obviously, with the Ravens, the Texans, Commanders, Colts, Patriots, Broncos, all out on bye this week. So we've got some kind of grittier decisions to decide this week. I love slates like this. I feel like we have a really great edge here at Fantasy Points. Our projections are led by our guy, Chris Wecht. We spend a ton of time every single week making sure these projections are as tight as possible. And I write a free start sit article over on fantasypoints.com to kind of give some color, release all my dank stats, as Scott would call it, go through all the matchups, go through every single fantasy relevant player, matchup, everything you need to know while you're setting lineups. Let's get to it, guys. Let's get to it with some quarterbacks. Honestly, with 6 teams out, this is a pretty solid week at quarterback. I think you could get away with 20. There's legitimately 20 quarterbacks who project reasonably well. That's 16 or more fantasy points. We have 20 this week. Start, at the top. Must starts are the obvious guys: Hurts, Burrow, Allen. I'll throw Mayfield pretty much in that group at this point. He's been must start. Sam Darnold in an amazing spot against Atlanta. I think, he's pretty much just been a shoo-in, really has limited the turnovers the last couple of weeks. So we'll kind of talk through some of the lower end quarterback ones. Obviously, Justin Herbert burned everybody last week. That game just ended up being an absolute dud. Cousins threw all of those picks. Herbert threw, had a really tough, had a great game with Ladd McConkey, but, he struggled holding the ball a little too long when he wasn't hooking up with McConkey. I think we should go right back to Herbert. At the very worst, a low-end quarterback one, we were treating him as a must-start player last week. I don't want to hear a ton of questions on Sunday when Tom and John and I are going through starts and sits on the live stream with you guys, setting your lineups. I think Herbert is still a really good quarterback one this week. Kansas City's just not been as good as late. Chiefs allowing the 10th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game over the last 8 weeks. And we saw it last week. The Chargers can't run the ball. J.K. Dobbins is out for at least 3 more games. They tried with Gus Edwards. They tried with Hassan Haskins. He fumbled. They tried with Kamani Vidal. The Chargers are just going to have to chuck it. Chiefs are one of the best, if not the best, run defense in the NFL right now. Jameis Winston is not going to project well no matter where you look. You got to respect the Steelers defense, right? Like we can't necessarily project Winston to keep doing what he's been doing. But you know what? I still think he's a really good, at worst, low-end quarterback one this week. The floor is amazing because the volume is amazing. Let's take a step back and just look at this from like 1,000-foot level view for a second. You know, we were on Winston when he came in as a starter in week 8, perfect spot against Baltimore. We were on that. We were on Tillman. We were on Judy. And it was simply because, like, listen, we just need some functional quarterback play here. Since that point, all Jameis Winston has done is average 23 fantasy points per game. Only Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen are averaging more fantasy points per game since week 8. Winston is QB5 by fantasy points per game. And again, it's driven by volume. They can't run the ball. They have not been able to run the ball all season. They tried with Nick Chubb. They ended up kind of demoting him last week. Jerome Ford played more. Winston is averaging 44 pass attempts per game. You know, Browns are top 5, top 6 in pass rate over expectation. Steelers have a great run defense. I just see another spot here where Winston has to chuck it. And like, this is what he's always been. He's always been a fantasy carnival where like he scores, his receivers score well, and the defense he's playing against scores well. This week, I think Jameis just has a lot of like unprojectable upside. I think I wouldn't treat him as like the QB5 like he's been, but I think he's at worst like a top 12 play this week at worst, like probably closer to top 10, given how high the floor is. This kind of reminds me of like what Justin Herbert did back in the day when he was just like slinging it. The Chargers like couldn't run the ball. Their defense was terrible, giving up a ton of points. Herbert was throwing like 38, 39, 40 times a game. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that with Jameis, but Jameis is just a ton of fun. One other quarterback I like a little bit more than usual this week is Caleb Williams. It's not just the OC change. He's playing better as of late for sure. That first half against Detroit was a struggle, and then he kind of turned it on. Caleb Williams is definitely playing better. Last 3 games with Thomas Brown calling the plays, we've seen his time to throw really, really quicken, 2.4 seconds. That's 10th fastest according to FantasyPoints data. Bears have shifted more pass heavy. They are passing at 8% over expectation the last 3 weeks. And this is a pretty good spot if Nick Bosa can't play again. Bosa is the linchpin to the 49ers pass rush. It'd be like if Myles Garrett were out for the Browns. Like they would be in a world of trouble trying to get after the quarterback. We've seen it with San Francisco. They've pressured quarterbacks on just 16% of their dropbacks over the last 2 weeks without Bosa, who's been dealing with this hip injury. Even if he's like a little limited, it really hurts their pass rush. It'll really help Caleb have a clean pocket. And I like Bears in this game quite a bit. We'll talk a little bit more about Bears here in a second. One quarterback we've been all over as a streamer off the waiver wire since basically he got Puka back, Matt Stafford. He's QB6 in yards per game, has a 14-3 touchdown to interception ratio, averaging 19.7 fantasy points per game. Last 6 games since Puka came back. This is a really brutal spot, though, guys. Bills just don't give up anything. They play a ton of too high coverage. They're extremely well coached. They tackle incredibly well. And they just don't give up any production, really hardly through the air. No big plays, at least. Bills have allowed more than 19 fantasy points to one quarterback all year, and it was the MVP, Lamar Jackson. He did 54 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground to get there. Once again, it's just a really, really brutal spot for Bills. This, like I said, this is a pretty good week for quarterbacks. Two matchups actually I just have to highlight. Will Levis and Aiden O'Connell are like amazing plays in super flex leagues this week just because, well, 2 things. 1, they're playing pretty well, and 2, great matchups. Obviously, we've been streaming quarterbacks against the Jags all year. And we've been streaming quarterbacks against the Bucks all year. A little bit hidden upside, I think, with those 2 guys if you're absolutely in a pinch. All right, we'll keep it moving to running back. Obviously, without the King this week, without Jonathan Taylor, without Brian Robinson, who's coming off a fantastic game. No Joe Mixon this week. I'm glad we don't have to talk about Broncos running backs, that's for sure. No Ramondre. Tricky week at running back. This is obviously I think this is the worst week we've had a running back. It's just because, we've lost, all the top guys this week. Hopefully, if you have Henry, you have Mixon, you've already like salted away your first round bye, or you're just like 8-5 and looking great for like the 3 seed. The top of the running back board, I only really see like 8 must starts, and they're all the obvious guys. I don't think we really need to spend a whole lot of time on them. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Ken Walker. Really tough 5-game stretch on the ground for him. He was vultured last week by Charbonnet at the goal line on their game-winning drive. Seattle's just not been able to run the ball effectively at all. I mean, Walker's averaging 3 yards per carry in his last 5 games. He's always been a volatile player, right? Like, it's always been about the big plays with him. He'll, load up volume. He's still basically a back-end RB1 by volume. Since week 8, Walker's expected PPR points per game is 16. That's RB13 in that span. However, he's only scored 11.2, and that's RB30. I'm just sticking with Walker. I'm sticking with this volume. I chase volume in fantasy football. That's what I do. And with Walker, it's another bad spot. Like, Cardinals have played really stingy defense just in general as of late. And they're playing really good run defense, only 3.7 yards per carry allowed over the last 5 weeks. But Charbonnet's role, he got the goal line carry, but his role still was nothing amazing last week. Walker's still a really good RB2. Rico Dowdle, James Cook, James Conner. And I would honestly throw Aaron Jones back into the RB2 mix. He had like one of the worst games of his, probably the worst game of his career last week. Lost another fumble, second straight fumble he's had in the game. He also dropped a pass from Sam Darnold that would have been a touchdown last week. He ended up making up for it, obviously, on that game-winning drive there. But I think Jones's volume's safe. We're projecting his volume to be pretty safe. They've been mixing in Cam Akers and Ty Chandler a little more, but 5.5-point favorites at home against Atlanta. Can't not play Aaron Jones. Man, 49ers have been just like absolutely wrecked on the ground too. 5.2 yards per carry with no Nick Bosa the last 2 weeks. Roshan Johnson is in the concussion protocol for the Bears, so DeAndre Swift might see a monster role. We like Caleb Williams, so definitely makes me a little higher on Swift this week. I wouldn't say I'm high on Tyrone Tracy. We have, Isaac Guerendo, definitely Kyron Williams, Najee ahead of him in projections, but I still think he projects really well. This is a good matchup too. Saints allow 5.2 yards per carry. That's a league high. They've just not been good at all on the ground for the entirety of the season. And yeah, sure, he's fumbled. He had the pass clang off his hands that got picked off against that in that Panthers game, I think near the end of the game. It didn't matter, though. He still widely outsnapped Devin Singletary last week, 75% to 22%. They split carries. Tracy got the goal line plunge, obviously, but what matters most to me is Tracy just has a stranglehold on all of the passing down work. Ran 24 routes to Singletary's 4 last week, so if the Giants get behind again, it will be the Tracy dump-off show. And we've seen Drew Lock, kind of unlike Daniel Jones, a little unlike Tommy DeVito too. Lock isn't as mobile. He's going to dump the ball down. He's not going to try to scramble as much as those two, which is very good for Tracy. I mentioned Isaac Guerendo. If you picked him up off the waiver wire this week, he's just like one of the best RB2 plays on the slate. Like, you just are going to bank your 16 to 20 touches and just, hope that Trent Williams and Aaron Banks can play there on that left side for the Niners. Scary, very, very scary spot for Chuba Hubbard this week. I'm not concerned about the role. Hubbard has played on 84% of the snaps. Jonathan Brooks just at 15% in their 2 games played. Brooks was barely involved last week. You look at the box score, you'll be like, oh my God, Hubbard wasn't targeted, but Brooks only ran 6 routes. He just happened to get 3 targets on those 6 routes while Hubbard wasn't targeted. The problem is, it's not just like, Hubbard's never going to be a great passing down player to begin with. The Eagles are just not giving up any touchdowns. Panthers have a very, very low implied team total this week. They're 12.5-point dogs. going into Philly. I think this is one of the worst layouts Chuba has had, probably the worst layout Chuba's had all season. Panthers have an implied total of 16.8 points. That's worse than the Mac Jones-led Jaguars at 17.5. I'm full. I wouldn't say full fading Panthers in this spot, but I'm kind of full fading Hubbard. I do like Adam Thielen a little bit in that game. We'll move on to receivers. Let's talk through receivers a little bit. Do like Adam Thielen a little bit this week. Had a kind of a turn back the clock. Let's beat old father time game last week. Looks quick and out of his breaks. And the Eagles are not burnable through the slot by any means. But they're just not. He's not running his routes outside. It's like, you're not going to get anything against Quinyon Mitchell right now. Eagles holding opposing outside wide receivers to a league low in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game, but they're like perfectly average slot receivers, and that is Thielen's jam. One old slot receiver to another old slot receiver, Keenan Allen. Last 3 games, the Bears have just kind of consolidated their targets a little bit. With Thomas Brown calling the plays instead of Shane Waldron. Keenan Allen and DJ Moore have both seen basically 30% of the first 3 targets. Allen has 32%, Moore has 29%. Allen's been very quietly pretty good. 18 receptions, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Crushed last week in a great matchup we highlighted against the Lions, and this is another pretty good matchup. San Francisco allows 1.9 yards per route run to opposing slot receivers, according to FantasyPoints data. And obviously that is all Allen. One receiver, man, I have to talk about here. Obviously, Calvin Ridley crushed you if you had him last week. It was brutal to watch Nick Westbrook go for yet another touchdown. But zooming out, Ridley still leads his team in targets with 27. He has an 18-yard average depth of target, which is that's just fun. That's just a whole lot of fun. 18 yards average depth of target with Levis back over the last 4 weeks. And guess what? He gets the Jags. And guess what they're still doing? Playing a lot of man coverage. Calvin Ridley is the wide receiver 5 in yards per route run at 3.0 in yards per route run when facing man coverage. Only 2 wide receivers have seen a higher rate of their team's targets against man coverage. Ridley has a 34% target share, and Tyson Campbell is a little banged up, Jaguars' best corner. I'm all in on Ridley this week. I don't want to hear any questions about Ridley. I also think, Nick Westbrook's touchdown rate is highly, highly fluky. No way that keeps repeating. You're going to hear every analyst say that. However, we chase volume here. We chase targets. The Titans are not going to blow the doors off anybody with like 45 pass attempts this week. This game environment just doesn't have that in its range of outcomes. The total is 39.5 with the over-under. However, he gets a great matchup once again. Westbrook gets this great matchup. Jags give up the most yards per game to opposing outside wide receivers. And Westbrook has seen at least 16% of the team's targets in 4 of his last 5 games. So, sure, he probably won't score, 3 touchdowns in this game like he's been doing. I'm joking, obviously. But I'm into Westbrook Akine this week for sure as a wide receiver 3 on the low end. On the higher end of the wide receiver 3 spectrum this week, I think is Elijah Moore. Jameis Winston not only just unlocked Jerry Jeudy, he unlocked Cedric Tillman when he's been healthy. He's unlocked Elijah Moore. The biggest thing here with Moore is that his average depth of target has basically quadrupled. His average target right now is 12 yards down the field with Winston. With their last quarterback, with Deshaun Watson, it was a pitiful 5 yards. Moore's just consistently involved. 17% of the targets in 5 straight games with Winston. Cedric Tillman is not, right as of right now, I'm recording this on Thursday evening, Cedric Tillman is still in concussion protocol, so Moore's volume should be really good. And Jerry Jeudy's going to be locked down on Joey Porter Jr. for at least half of his routes. The Browns do a really good job of getting Jeudy loose, which we noted last week. Did not see the 200-yard best revenge game ever from Jeudy. I think he still must play this week. Jeudy, I'm not even. I wrote him up as a must play. I don't even think you consider it. Even in this tougher matchup, he will see Joey Porter Jr. Going down the board a little bit further, Deebo Samuel's just not healthy. We've been saying it for a few weeks. I think you just have to kind of continue sitting him until he shows signs of life. And this is a really, really rough matchup. He plays majority of his snaps on the perimeter last 5 weeks. 70% of his routes are outside, so he's going to see a ton of Jalen Johnson. Brock Purdy, no clue how healthy he is. Trent Williams and Aaron Banks, we were talking about earlier, their left side of their offensive line missed last week. Just rough scenes for Deebo. I do like Jauan Jennings a little bit more than Deebo again this week, but he still doesn't project as well as he did when we knew Purdy was healthy and they had Trent Williams and they had all their dudes. But on the lower end, I think Brian Thomas still projects really well. I have no respect for the Titans secondary. I think they're very burnable. It was good to see Mac Jones have a really nice game last week in relief of Trevor Lawrence, who is on IR now. So I'd be pretty comfortable, honestly, playing BTJ. The volume should at least be good. He's going to draw like 8 or 9 targets this week with everything kind of condensing. No Gabe Davis, no Christian Kirk. I think that's going to do it for receiver. No, it's not. I had one note in here. What are we going to do with Devonta Smith this week? That's the biggest question. He has, I think, one of the widest range of outcomes among wide receiver threes. Like going through our projections, we have Elijah Moore and Devonta Smith back to back in projections. However, I feel way more comfortable about Moore getting me locked in 10 to 12 points than Devonta Smith this week. He's healthy. Like the hamstring injury is in the past, he's missed 2 weeks. He was back to full practice. He should be full go. I expect him to get a full complement of snaps. Usually when the Eagles get a guy back to full practice, he's actually full go. The problem is the volume here is horrendous. Like we were talking about earlier, Eagles are huge favorites. The Eagles are the most run-heavy team in the league, negative 10% pass rate under expectations since their bye. Jalen Hurts is averaging just 22 pass attempts per game over his last 8 starts. Dallas Goedert will miss here, but to me, Devonta Smith has a floor of 4 points and a ceiling of 20. He's a really, really tricky call this week. I think if, let's say you're 8-5 and you're favored, and you're trying to decide between Devonta Smith and another receiver, I would maybe take a slightly higher floor play. And if you're a dog, chase some ceiling with Devonta Smith because the Panthers secondary is so bad. He might just need 3 or 4 targets to get 65 yards and a touchdown in this game. All right, now we're even moving on to tight ends. Then we talk through some receivers. Tight end is abysmal this week, as you could expect. Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, Jonnu Smith, and George Kittle are your must-starts. David Njoku is borderline must-start. He doesn't project that way. Like I said, still got a lot of respect for that Steelers defense. Cade Otton is certainly not must-start after the last 2 weeks, but God, man, this is just another amazing matchup. Airballed last week, but he did get 7 targets, so the usage is still there. The route share was still good. The Raiders have been a target of ours for tight ends all season, but looking at the last 5 weeks, they are playing the worst tight end defense I have seen all season, and it's not remotely close. Not just by the numbers, going back and, go back and watch that, Black Friday game, man. They were just blowing holes in the Raiders coverage in the middle of the field. Las Vegas has allowed 103 yards per game to tight ends over the last 5 weeks. I triple checked that stat just to make sure that was actually correct because it's that crazy. I mean, they've just gotten killed. I mean, Kelsey's gotten them twice. Mike Gesicki and the entire Bengals tight end group got them in week 9. Jonnu had 6 for 101 and 2 touchdowns. They're just getting absolutely bludgeoned. Mike Evans is dealing with a hamstring and a calf injury. He did not practice on Thursday. Obviously, he's must start if he's on the field. But Evans still battling this hamstring thing. Great spot for Otton. I could see him bouncing back this week. One tight end I have not talked about, I don't think at all this season, is Pat Freiermuth. He's kind of come alive he's kind of come alive as of late here. Last 2 weeks, he's turned his 11 targets into 10 grabs, 127 yards, and a touchdown. And he led the team in targets with an 18% share last week for the first time all year. I have picked up Freiermuth in a few spots this week where I'm just like dying at tight end. I've lost Taysom Hill, RIP to the GOAT. But picked up Freiermuth. Doesn't make you feel amazing, but following the numbers, it's a pretty good matchup. The usage is coming up. Russell Wilson's playing well. And I just like that game environment. I think that game total, the Cleveland-Pittsburgh game total, 43.5, makes no sense. Games with Winston have scored 51 total combined points on average since week 8. Russell Wilson's playing pretty well. Pittsburgh's top 5 in scores per possession since week 7. Cleveland's defense is not very good besides Myles Garrett. I just think that game total is really, really too low. Lack Pat Freiermuth in this game. Cleveland allows 2.3 yards per route run, according to FantasyPoints data to slot receivers. And Pat Freiermuth is basically a big slot receiver. He lines up in the slot 58% of his routes. Beyond that, I'm a little lower on TJ Hockenson this week. Obviously, if you have no other viable options, you don't have, and I don't even know, like, probably you could have Cade Otton and Hockenson. You could definitely have Hockenson and Freiermuth. I don't know if I'd go that far to bench Hawk for Freiermuth, but it does scare me Josh Oliver coming back. Josh Oliver is highly involved. Vikings love to play a lot of 12 two tight end personnel with 2 receivers. Since returning, Hawk is the tight end 14 by fantasy points per game with just 9.7. And Oliver missed the last 2 games with this ankle injury. He's coming back. Hawkinson's route share was just 57% in 3 games with Oliver, while Oliver was running out there at 40% of the time. So could see a little bit of like Ravens-esque type, splits happening here where both tight ends are, full-time players-ish, but they do a little bit of chipping, a little bit of blocking. And Oliver just taking, few routes away from Hockenson really does hurt him, especially when considering Hockenson is a distant 3rd in first read target share at just 18% since week 9. Jordan Addison is at 31% first read target share. He has become a lot more involved, and he is a really good wide receiver to play this week. And Justin Jefferson is still right behind him at 26%. Obviously, Jefferson has a chance to go nuclear this week if Falcons keep playing a ton of man coverage. That will do it for me. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Please, if you could, like this video, leave a comment down below. If you disagreed with any of the calls this week, if you agreed with any of the calls this week, we'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel. We're at over 13,000 subscribers. Thanks to you guys. We had a goal of 15 by the end of the year. We could get there if we push really hard. And we are running sales at fantasypoints.com, fantasypoints.com/plans. We are 80% off. So if you need some projections, you want to follow my bets, Tom Brawley's bets, John Hanson's bets, our guy Justin Varnes does all the defensive bets, and he just has a massive edge. Once again, hitting at like 60%. I promise you, if you grab one of those 80% off plans for premium or all in, it will pay for itself this weekend. Good luck in week 14. We'll see you guys at the top of the leaderboards.